today, and we're going to focus on the processes that are influencing all of Europe after the Congress of Vienna, and how we can see that playing in on what goes on in Italy. All right. So just to review what we're talking about when we talk about Italian unification, you need to understand that really throughout the course in AP European history, we haven't really talked about an Italy. We've talked about Italian states. You know, think back to the Renaissance. When we began this course looking at Renaissance Italy, we talked about the fact that Italy was a conglomeration of a variety of types of political structures, from republics to oligarchies to monarchies, ruled in some cases by Italians, in other cases by non-Italians, and that process had basically continued. We know that during the French Revolution, Napoleon had conquered the Italian peninsula and started to unify Italy into Italian states. This idea of nationalism, this powerful force that grew out of the French Revolution, had a dramatic influence on Italy and really played into this sense of Italian culture and what it meant to be Italian. So when we look at the unification of Italy, we definitely have to give kudos to Napoleon's armies and how they influenced the growth of nationalism there. We also understand that the Congress of Vienna had basically undone much of what Napoleon had created by sort of redividing Italy into its more traditional states. Remember, the Congress of Vienna was about legitimacy and conservatism, returning Europe to a pre-French Revolution status. And so when we look at this map here of Italy, we can see that the Kingdom of Two Sicilies was reestablished by the Congress of Vienna, and this territory is ruled by the Bourbons. The Papal States, of course, are also controlled here, officially by Rome and by the Pope. This is territory that belongs to the Church, but was largely protected by France, a relationship that goes back way in European history as well. And then we have the northern part of Italy here, which the largest, most powerful piece was the Piedmont-Sardinia kingdom. And this was actually governed by Italians, right? So there's an Italian leader in Piedmont-Sardinia, and that will ultimately form the foundation for the first kingdom of Italy. We also notice that there's a huge section here controlled by the Austrians, in particular Venetia, that of course will be critical to bringing together a unified Italy. So what we're going to look at is the process by which leaders, sort of representing different parts of Italy and different ideas in Italy, are going to be able, over the course of a couple of decades, to bring Italy together into a unified kingdom. So we will have a unified Italy. Now, to understand this process, we need to talk about the three most important individuals in Italian unification, and they each have a unique role to play in the unification of Italy. The first of these leaders is the guy here at the top. His name is Giuseppe Mazzini, who is originally from Genoa, and Mazzini is particularly important in fostering and encouraging this sense of Italian nationalism. Mazzini is one of the earliest founders of organizations that really push for revolutionary movements in Italy against outside forces. We think of Mazzini as the Italy for Italians guy, right? And he is truly an organizer of revolutionary movements. He is a liberal and a nationalist. Mazzini's greatest goal, and this is really important for sort of how he feels at the end of this process, Mazzini's greatest goal is that Italy would be a unified state under a republican form of government, that Italy would become a republic governed by Italians with a liberal constitution that formed the basis of this government. And this is the view, this is the goal he has in mind when he first begins moving toward Italian unification and organizing these movements against foreign outside influences and controls on Italy as early as the 1820s. The second leader over here on the side is Giuseppe Garibaldi, who is from the Two Sicilies, and will be largely the nationalist center of Italy. He will be the face of those fighting for Italian unification and Italian nationalism. And then third, we have Count Camillo di Cavour, who is the political mastermind behind the unification of Italy, the person who is able to pull this passion of Mazzini and this force of Garibaldi into a political organization to create the Kingdom of Italy. He is the prime minister, foreign minister, and prime minister for Victor Emmanuel II, who will become the king of Piedmont Sardinia. And so he is the one who is going to basically be the mastermind behind this. So as we look at these individuals, here's how I usually try to distinguish them from one another. And of course, Cavour is also a nationalist. So up here we have Mazzini, and I put a halo on Mazzini's head because Mazzini is the soul of Italian nationalism. He is the one motivating the population, this mass politics. That is largely Mazzini's role. To Garibaldi, we give a sword. Garibaldi organizes a military force in Italy that becomes known as the Red Shirts. And he will be the sword behind the view of nationalism, the force that's going to make it happen for this view of nationalism. And then we have Cavour here at the bottom, who is essentially the brains of the operation. Cavour is able to bring the force of Garibaldi and the vision of Mazzini into a political system that becomes the Kingdom of Italy. And so Italian unification requires the leadership of all three of these individuals. We can kind of compare this to the leadership that we're going to see by Otto von Bismarck in Germany, who's really able to sort of meld all of these sort of purposes together. So where Bismarck can be the soul and the sword and the brains, in Italy we see this carried out by many different leaders through Italian unification. Now here's an important concept, the idea of the risorgimento, which basically means resurgence. This is an idea founded and sort of popularized by Count Camillo di Cavour all the way back into the 1840s, which is really where this story begins for Italian unification. By resurgence, we mean a movement for national independence. And it's largely this early movement that's going to eventually lead to the unification of Italy, but not until 1871. So we think of the risorgimento beginning in 1847, leading into the revolutions of 1848, and becoming sort of this background to how we see the independence of Italy developing largely in the 1860s, over that decade. Another force behind the unification of Italy, sort of encompassed into this risorgimento, are nationalist groups spread throughout Italy who are known as the Carbonari. Carbonari is actually a term, the actual word means coal burners, and it refers to a bunch of secret revolutionary groups that operated out throughout Italy in the 1850s, 60s, and 70s. Not completely unified. There's no one organization sort of organizing these different groups, but they largely spring up in Italy in response to the Congress of Vienna. So they are some of the earliest groups we see as early as the 1820s. And they're leading revolutions against the foreign Bourbon, against the French coming back into the Papal States, against Austrian control in Venetian Lombardy. And so they're sort of providing this mass grassroots efforts for Italian unification. And then, of course, there is Giuseppe Mazzini, the soul of Italian unification, who organizes a movement called Young Italy. And Young Italy is this effort to organize all these nationalist groups into a movement to bring about Italian unification. It's based on nationalism, liberalism, and republicanism. Remember, Mazzini sees Italy's future as a great republic to be built. Think about it. It is the source of a republic, right? We're talking about Roman history and the Roman Republic as the great example to France and the United States, and that is what Mazzini has in mind. It is also why he will be disappointed by the creation of a kingdom at the end of this process. So what we see happen in Italy is the foundation of the Risorgimento and the Carbonari groups operating in various parts and creating havoc for outside rulers. And we have Mazzini's publication of Young Italy movements throughout Italy that really sort of come together in 1848. Remember, 1848 is the year of revolutions. We see revolutions all over Europe in 1848. And we also see them in Italy. In Italy, this is where Italian nationalists and liberals see their opportunity to end foreign domination, to create an Italy for Italians. And so here's basically how the goals are laid out if we kind of try to organize them. Now, this is a much more organized list than Italy looked like in the 1840s, but we have to put this down in some kind of way we can understand. So in Milan, Lombardy, and Venetia, there is a goal and a desire to expel the Austrian rulers. And we can see this over here in the map, right? These northern areas which are part of the Austrian Empire. And nationalists and liberals want Austria out. There's also the House of Savoy in the Kingdom of Sardinia, Piedmont, who grant during 1848 a liberal constitution, a constitutional monarchy, which gives hope to this idea of a unified Italy. And there are, of course, the Bourbon rulers still in the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, which Italian nationalists want to see kicked out, right? They want to see Italy for Italians. So in 1848, this is kind of how things go down. Mazzini, who had been exiled in 1830, captured by authorities and sent, basically forced out of Italy. He'd fled to Marseille in France, where he had helped to organize young Italy from abroad, right, from outside of Italy. In 1848, he will see the opportunity to return. So he comes back into Italy in the midst of all of these upheavals, leads a force that establishes and declares a Roman Republic in 1849 in Italy. He is supported by Giuseppe Garibaldi, who was the leader of this new militant group, this new militia group called the Red Shirts from the Two Sicilies. And they combine in 1849 to establish a Roman or Italian republic. They forced the Pope, Pius IX, to flee from the Vatican. So this looks like it's going to be the establishment of an Italy for Italians, right? 1848, this revolutionary sort of flood across Europe. Unfortunately, much like the rest of Europe, there were massive forces of conservatism to stop this change from happening. And in Italy, what we see is Austria's use of a powerful military response to sort of smack down on this attempt by the Italians to establish their own nation. And so Austria will send in General Radetzky to crush the independence movement of Sardinia-Piedmont. French troops move in and take back the Papal States. So the French move in, seeing the threat to Pius IX and the loss of power there, and they force Mazzini back into exile and Garibaldi and the Red Shirts back into the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, and of course reestablish control by the papacy. But we do see Victor Emmanuel II take the throne in Sardinia-Piedmont, okay? So the Austrians take back Venetia and Lombardy. They don't lose that. But they're unable to remove this Italian king, and it's his image we see over here, from the throne. And Victor Emmanuel will appoint Count Camillo di Cavour as his foreign minister, and they together will begin to create this first basis of an Italian kingdom in Sardinia-Piedmont. And ultimately, this is the foundation for the organization of an Italian state. Now, the whole idea here of bringing together Italy was thwarted by the cooperation of Austria and France. Austria and France basically colluded, right? Conservatism argues that we can't have this unified Italy, this new nationalist, possibly a threat to the conservative order of Europe, happen. And so in 1848, these two powerful forces had worked against Italian unification. What we're going to see happen in 1853 is the outbreak of a tremendously important conflict in Europe called the Crimean War, which of course occurs between the Ottomans and the Russians. But we're going to see the Crimean War drag in European powers, or they will voluntarily jump into the melee. And in this case, the Sardinians are going to help the French in their fight in the Crimean War. And this will alter the balance of power that's operating and influencing what's going on in Italy. So basically, the Italian leaders, particularly Count Cavour, sees the unification of Italy occurring in 3 steps, okay? And we can compare this to the 3 steps of unification that we'll see happen in Germany. The first step is the removal of the influence of Austria. This step is similar in Germany and in Italian unification. You cannot have an Italian state, you cannot have a German state, as long as the Austrians are governing part of it. And so this is the first step. The second step is for the Kingdom of Sardinia-Piedmont, the kingdom that is ruled by Italians in the northern part of Italy, to unify itself to the Kingdom of Two Sicilies in the southern part of Italy. And of course, this will bring the Italians into conflict with the Bourbons and the requirement to remove the Bourbons from power. And here we will see the actions of Garibaldi and the Red Shirts. And finally, of course, to create a unified Italy, North and South must be brought together in the middle. The Papal States, those central states that have been governed by the Church and claimed by the Church since the Middle Ages, must come under Italian government control. And that will be the final step in the process. This process will involve maneuvering of foreign powers and typically is the brainchild of Count Camillo di Cavour. So step 1 is to get rid of the Austrians. Now, the critical thing here is to know who is enemy of your enemy. Who else is fighting with the country that you need to sort of be in conflict with. So Cavour in the Kingdom of Sardinia-Piedmont will broker a treaty with France. Now, why is France willing to negotiate and form a treaty with Sardinia-Piedmont? This largely goes back to the Crimean War, where the Sardinians had been very important support to the French in that conflict. And so essentially the French will say, look, we'll support you, we'll help you, we'll deal with you taking away territory from Austria. We won't try to stop you from doing that. And in fact, we'll even provide some tactical support to that. In exchange for you turning over French territories that belong to Sardinia, okay? So here on the map we see Savoy and we see Nice, both territories that the French had claimed as traditional French lands, and Cavour is willing to trade those territories away for the opportunity to get rid of the Austrians out of northern Italy, out of Italian territories. So essentially, the Austrians will force the armies of Sardinia will force the Austrians out of Lombardy, and the French will agree to allow the Sardinia-Piedmont forces to come down and surround and occupy all the territories around the Papal States. In other words, they agree essentially to allow Sardinian armies, Italian armies, to move down and through the Papal States to this point right about here, which is where the Kingdom of Two Sicilies begins. Essentially, the French are acquiescing in this goal of removing Austria from power in France. Now, you notice Venetia remains up here, and at this point, Sardinia doesn't really have the power to force the Austrians out. That step will be facilitated by Prussia's conflict with Austria as part of German unification. So we see the unification of these two areas, of the unification of Italy and Germany, definitely supporting one another in their common enemies. Step 2 was to unify Sardinia-Piedmont, the Italian kingdom in the north, with the Two Sicilies in the south. This revolved around removing the Spanish Bourbons from their control of the kingdom of the Two Sicilies. This is achieved largely by the military efforts of Giuseppe Garibaldi and the Red Shirts. So the Red Shirts in the southern part of Italy will engage the Bourbons in battle and essentially force the Spanish Bourbons out. This is actually fairly easy to accomplish with the backbone of the Carbonari and the organized nationalist militias under the leadership of Garibaldi. It's really impossible for the Bourbons to hold on to the kingdom of the Two Sicilies without support from somebody else, which they don't get. They don't get support from France. They don't get support from Austria. And so they are kicked out. Now, at this point, we begin to see some division within the Italian leaders. Mazzini, in particular, is not real keen on the direction this unification process is taking. He is concerned because what he sees happening here is the establishment of a monarchy for Italy, and he doesn't see this moving in the direction of a republic, which is what he's been calling for since the 1820s and 30s with this Young Italy movement. So he's becoming somewhat disillusioned by what's going on here, and so the leadership of unification will come specifically to Cavour and Garibaldi. In 1861, Garibaldi, and here we see an amazing picture where Garibaldi meets Count Camillo di Cavour and the King Victor Emmanuel II, meets together and essentially hands over this kingdom that he has won to the Kingdom of Sardinia-Piedmont, which is really kind of unusual if we think about movements in Europe. And it's a testament to the power of nationalism. Garibaldi won the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. Rather than trying to hold it for himself, which some of his supporters wanted him to do, he turns it over to the Kingdom of Sardinia-Piedmont with the promise and the expectation, which is obviously what happens, that the two kingdoms will be joined together into a Kingdom of Italy. And so what we see happen here is the establishment, the official proclamation in 1861 of the Kingdom of Italy. It is proclaimed by Count Camillo di Cavour in the name of Victor Emmanuel II, so that all the nationalists in Italy will have this kingdom they can now call their own. And it pleases virtually everyone except Mazzini, who's a little disappointed that it's a monarch, and of course the Papal States, who feel directly threatened by this organization of a kingdom around them. So the Papal States are essentially this island in the middle of Italy, surrounded by the Kingdom of Italy. Venetia now falls into the hands of the Kingdom of Italy. It will become part of the Kingdom of Italy, largely by the maneuverings of Bismarck in Germany, which we are going to talk about more in class. So in 1866, the 7 Weeks' War occurs between Austria and Prussia, Italy, of course, will join the 7 Weeks' War as an ally of Prussia against Austria, and their reward will be the Kingdom of Venetia. So the province of Venetia will be turned over to Italy, and it will join the Kingdom of Italy, leaving only the Papal States outside of the Kingdom of Italy. And so the third step in this process is to unite the Papal States with the Kingdom of Italy to create one unified Italian state. And standing in the way of that is this guy right here, Pope Pius IX. I'm not sure about any of you, but just for a nerd moment, he looks amazingly like the Emperor in Star Wars at this point. But to be more serious about what's going on in Italy, Pius IX is absolutely adamantly opposed to what's been happening in Italy. He refuses any offer at peaceful unification because King Victor Emmanuel II, a Catholic and a nationalist who's trying to bring Italians, who are Catholics, together, would like nothing more than the peaceful organization, the peaceful unification of the Papal States with the Kingdom of Italy. Pius IX will have nothing to do with such an idea. He was literally born and raised in the Papal States. As Pope, he sees this as his birthright. We talk about legitimacy and classes. He sees himself as the legitimate ruler and the only legitimate ruler of the Papal States. And so he refuses and feels confident in his ability to thwart the efforts of the Kingdom of Italy to take the Papal States because he has the support of France. Okay? And that would probably have worked out to his advantage, except it's going to sort of fall apart in the events leading to German unification. So Pius IX stands as the last opponent to German unification. And what we're going to see in Pius IX, and we're going to talk about him a little bit further beyond this, is that he is essentially an opponent to everything that is happening in Italy. He is an opponent of liberalism. He is an opponent of socialism. He is an opponent of republicanism and an opponent of nationalism. If ever Clemens von Metternich had an ally in his conservative view of Europe, it is Pope Pius IX. And so Pius will stand there as the last block to Italian unification. We're going to study his efforts to stop all of these isms by the church with his publication of what's called the Syllabus of Errors in 1864, in which he basically sort of lamblasts everything that's been changing about Europe and basically argues that all of these changes are anti-church, anti-Christian, everything that the conservatives believe in. Now, the problem for Pope Pius IX is that his security and his ability to hold the Papal States is tied up with France. And France is going to find itself maneuvered into a war with Prussia, maneuvered by Bismarck, the leader of the German unification process. And that war is going to take the ability of France away from protecting the Papal States. So in 1871, when the Franco-Prussian War begins, France, in an effort to protect its own borders, which it fails to do miserably, will pull armies out of the Papal States back into France to fight the Prussians. Remember, the Prussians have the most dominant military force in Europe, and the French will essentially be overwhelmed and basically left in a position where they cannot militarily protect the Papal States. In this vacuum created by France, when French troops leave the Papal States, Italian armies will move in and they will capture Rome in 1871. They will take the city of Rome and the Papal States and declare them united to the Kingdom of Italy. And Pius IX will declare himself to be a prisoner in the Vatican. And popes, starting with Pius IX through 1929, so from 1871 to 1929, a period of about 50 years, the popes will declare themselves to be prisoners in the Vatican. They will refuse to have relations with the Kingdom of Italy. They will not allow any exchange of ambassadors with the Kingdom of Italy, essentially separating themselves from the Kingdom of Italy itself. Nonetheless, the Kingdom of Italy will unite and form this basis of a united political state with the capture of Rome. And so Italy goes from being, in 1858, this divided territory of various foreign rulers and states into a unified Italian state. And we will compare this process of Italian unification and nationalism to what we see happen in Germany.